Before the story begins, I would like to encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy scary stories and creepypastas. I write a new story once a week and narrate it, so any support from you guys would be tremendously appreciated. Okay, guys, now on to the story. Cue the clock. Sirens. John was a peculiar man. He obsessed over the smallest of things, but more importantly, he was practically afraid of everything. If he saw his own shadow in the right light, he would jump from mere fright. When it came to insects, he would rather leave his home for a hotel than trying to deal with them. And scary movies, well, he felt as if he never had the need to see any. Though the thing that terrified John the most were strangers. To him, the idea of someone unknown interacting with him seemed a bit dangerous and unnecessary. John watched the news day in and day out. He would see just how much society had collapsed under its own morality. He felt no connection to his peers and just wanted to be left alone. This is why he worked the graveyard shift at some factory in the middle of nowhere. All he had to do was push several buttons every few hours as the midnight oil drained. The only interaction he ever had was with the security guard at the gate, an overweight man that had very little interest in conversing with John, something he relished. At the end of each shift, he would drive home in the dark, secluded interstate. While the world slept, he would have the road to himself. There was only one problem. John suffered from intense anxiety from the idea of one day being pulled over by the police. He'd seen enough segments on the news of some poor guy being harassed by law enforcement, or even worse. Not that John was a criminal by any means, but having a stranger pull you over in the middle of the night with all the authority to do whatever they wanted with you haunted John's thoughts. So every night as John headed out of the gate from work and merged onto the isolated interstate, he would take a deep breath and repeat a little prayer to himself, hoping the roads would remain empty. He knew he just needed to make it to the Westgate Bridge. It was his exit, and his home was merely a block away. This became part of his ritual. Leave work, say his little prayer, and do his best to make it to the bridge. As soon as passing it, he would sigh in relief, returning home to his much-desired solitude. Not every night did John remain alone on the quiet road. At times, there would be other motorists, usually speeding past him. Whenever another vehicle would present itself, John would slow down by design, hoping to draw as much distance as possible from him and the stranger. Once he almost collided with the driver, who was clearly intoxicated. John had to swerve off the road to avoid the impact. It led to his tire being blown out, causing him to have to change it in the middle of nowhere, where the surrounding woods encapsulated him in a reality of dread. Still, from all his incidents by other motorists, John never encountered a police car, and his prayers were to keep it that way, as long as possible. Unfortunately for John, that all changed one night. A night that seemed very much like the others, though there was a bit of change, for on this night, a heavy thunderstorm hovered above, one that engulfed his path home with rain. So he left work avoiding eye contact with the security guard as usual, and exited the gate. He inhaled deeply, practically filling his lungs to the point of them bursting, and then whispered his little prayer. Okay. He who watches over the heavens and land, "Watch over this road. Tonight, as I drive home with utter fright," John recited to himself. He pressed down on the accelerator, heading towards the interstate. As he merged onto the highway, something pricked at the back of John's mind. He couldn't understand why he felt so uneasy, more than usual. But somehow he knew this night was different. He perked out his neck, looking up at the sky, and realized that there was a full moon. "Oh no, perfect," he told himself. He did his best to pay the unsettling feeling that throttled in the back of his mind any attention. But as he continued driving, he began to sweat profusely, his shirt becoming drenched. He turned the radio on, hoping some modern-day pop song would distract him long enough until he got home. Soon, John was singing along with the overplayed chorus, and he was now tapping the steering wheel with the edge of his fingertip, trying to stay in rhythm. He began to giggle, realizing how silly he was being, worrying about a full moon. After all, he wasn't a superstitious man. He was afraid of many things, but the paranormal wasn't one of them. John was now only 30 miles from the Westgate Bridge, as the rain continued to cascade down through the midnight sky, engulfing his windshield, though he could feel his anxiety slowly dissipate while he remained singing to whatever song was playing on the radio, even making up his own lyrics. The road became more dim and almost narrow, as John noticed that the streetlights that hovered overhead weren't burning as usual, illuminating his path. "Wow, that's very odd," he told himself with a bit of bewilderment. He turned his high beams on, trying to navigate through the darkness, no longer paying attention to the radio. Rather, his eyes were bulging out, his gaze glued to the empty street ahead of him. He was practically on the edge of his car seat, peering through the shrouded windshield. That feeling of dread that permeated around him intensified, and he could feel his heart rate accelerate a bit. He now knew something was off. He squinted his eyes, trying to make out how many miles he had left on his journey, contemplating the idea of perhaps exiting early. He shook his head, understanding that out here in the middle of nowhere, that wouldn't be the best idea. So instead, he did something that he never did, and that is, he pressed down on the accelerator, thrusting him to a higher speed that he was not used to. He just wanted to get home, out of this weird scenario playing out in front of him. John looked at the speedometer, and to his shock, he was pushing 90 miles an hour. He pondered if he should slow down, but understood he needed to get home and off this road. He saw the highway markers pass by him quicker and quicker, finally making out how many miles he had left. Only 10 more miles. He chuckled in delight, knowing this dreadful night was almost over. And as the rain thundered down more fiercely, he decided to ease off the gas pedal and let his paranoia dissipate away. John stared at the speedometer, and he was down to 80, then 70. Eventually, he took his speed down to his usual 60 miles an hour, comfortable knowing he would be at the Westgate Bridge soon. But that's when he saw it. In the rearview mirror. It was like two devilish eyes glistening in the abyss. They were headlights. John was no longer alone on the road. He tried his best to ignore the incoming car. He was going to do his usual, which was pull to the side while the stranger passed. This time, though, he couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, because those lights were drawing closer and closer at such a rapid speed. And soon, he could hear the thunderous roars of that vehicle's engine. The car was swerving left to right, acting erratically. John didn't know if it was a drunk driver. He just knew he had to get out of the way. So he did. He put his hazard lights on and cautiously pulled to the side. The rain pounded with heavy thud against the roof of John's car as he sat there waiting for the stranger to pass. His breathing becoming more heavy as he noticed in the rearview the car was still swerving, but this time coming towards his direction. Oh no, what the hell are you doing? John screamed out with utter horror. The car drew nearer, heading towards his vehicle, about to plow right into it, when John finally pressed down on the gas and drove his car into the ditch on the side of the road, causing his car to stall. The stranger driving past barely missed hitting John as he hurled by at what seemed to be at least 100 miles per hour. For the first time, John reacted in a different way than he usually did. He passionately got out of his car and stormed towards the road, cursing at the stranger who nearly killed him. All he could see were the taillights of the vehicle, who had to be at least 5 minutes up the road already. Where's a cop when you need one? John scoffed as he stood in the pouring rain. Then, without notice, John got his wish. Sirens blared, echoing all around him, while he saw flashing lights fluttering in the air, but only for a moment. The car had to be driving at the fastest speed he's ever seen in his life. The vehicle passed so quickly it literally flung John into the air as it drove by. Ah! 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 What the hell was that? He cried out loud. John looked up and the sirens were gone, along with the blinking lights. The cop must have been out of view already somehow. The scared man didn't know what to think other than perhaps this high-speed chase was warranted. Maybe that maniac that nearly crashed into him was a killer of some sort. So John walked back to his car, trying to brush off the weird encounter. He was ready to head back onto the road. He turned the engine, and to his delight, his car shrieked to life, and he drove out of the hidden ditch. As John's nerves settled, he figured he'll turn the radio back on, hoping to hear some news on the high-speed chase that he just witnessed. But to his surprise, none of the radio stations worked. It was nothing but static. The curious man gasped in perplexity and nervously turned the radio back off. Instead, he set his sights straight ahead, the rain still skewing his vision. As the frightened man continued driving, he saw something up in the distance. He couldn't quite make it out. It was but a mere silhouette. As the small anomaly grew bigger, approaching closer, he realized it was blocking almost the entire road. John prudently stepped on the brakes, bringing his vehicle to a halt. And to his dismay, he realized it was the vehicle from earlier. But now, it was virtually in pieces. The truck was destroyed. John got out of his car and carefully looked over the wreckage, not understanding what he was seeing. And then he saw the body. No, several bodies. There were bits and pieces of what used to be people. He saw an arm laying in front of him and quickly realized it was a woman's arm. It still had an engagement ring on her finger. The scared man started dry heaving from utter shock. He didn't know what to do. Just figured this had to be some atrocious car accident, but what happened to the cop? He thought. John looked around, trying to figure out what was happening, how this could even have happened. But that same feeling of uneasiness crept its way back into the forefront of his mind, and he swiftly started to walk back to his car, thinking he would call for help once driving away. As he approached his vehicle, he saw those same flashing lights in the distance, from way behind in the dark road. It couldn't be the same cop. How the hell did it get back there so quickly? He thought. John contemplated the idea of waving his arms in the air for help, but that feeling of dread grew stronger, and he decided to get back into his car instead. As he reached for the door handle, he heard the sirens. Well, what he thought were sirens, but they were noises he'd never heard before. More like a monstrous howl. The sounds roared throughout the midnight air, penetrating through the rain. And that's when John realized that wasn't a cop. But more terrifying, that thing wasn't even a car. No, impossible, John repeated to himself as he flung himself inside, turning the engine. He pressed down on the gas pedal, his car screeching to life, the tires flinging mud into the air as he propelled forward. John knew he had to make it to the Westgate Bridge, that there he would be safe. He was only 5 miles away. He could make it, he thought. The rain became more heavy, as if the storm itself was trying to keep John from escaping. But he powered through. At this point, he didn't even care if he could see anything, because his eyes no longer were fixated ahead. Instead, his gaze was focused on the rearview mirror. Those lights, the red and blue, they were getting closer. And the sirens, they were getting louder. Come on, I'm almost there. Come on, stupid car, go faster! John yelped out loud, his wipers doing his best to clear his view, smashing back and forth with vigorous intent, all while mountains of water descended down onto his windshield. John continued driving, not letting the weather deter him. He thought he could see his exit, his salvation, the bridge. His heart was practically plunging out of his chest. The hard sounds from whatever this beast was continued to get closer, and the flashing lights engulfed the dark and isolated road. Funny enough, that actually helped John see a bit better, illuminating his path. And he quickly saw his exit staring onto the Westgate Bridge, exiting onto his street. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw the lights had stopped right before the bridge started. But the sirens, they were even more thunderous, as if the monster was angry that he escaped. John even turned his head to get a better view of the flashing lights, and to his astonishment, the creature really was stationed before the bridge. And John came to the realization that, for whatever reason, that thing couldn't cross. So John did something very unlike himself. Perhaps the night of terror helped him grow as a person. No longer imprisoned by his own fear, rather, he was more brave and courageous. He got out of his car and walked closer to the edge of the bridge, ready to taunt this devil that kept shrieking in anguish. I made it! Yeah, you see, I made it! I'm not scared anymore! John shouted out in triumph. But to John's dread, he saw the lights began to move towards him cautiously, venturing onto the bridge. And for the first time, he was close enough to see the beast. It was massive, beyond comprehension, and it almost seemed like it smiled at him, revealing its endless layer of serrated teeth. John's one smile dropped, and he turned to run back to his car. The sirens now mere feet away, and without looking, John pressed down on the accelerator. But then, bang! The next morning, as the storm cleared, sirens and flashing lights inundated the Westgate Bridge as law enforcement investigated the bizarre and macabre scene. John's car remained in ruins, torn into remnants. But the real mystery for them was John himself. He was gone, nowhere to be found. As if somehow the earth opened up and swallowed him alive. Hi guys, thank you for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please like the video, leave a comment, give me any suggestions on what you think or how I could really improve my channel. Now I'm really curious. I wrote this story in third person, so let me know what you think in the comments. Is third person better than first person? I don't know, I like writing both. Me personally, I like first person stories. I get lost more in the character. But I know a lot of people like third person, so I'm really curious to know what you guys think. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I would encourage you to subscribe. I'm coming out with a story once a week, original stuff. And if you have any suggestions or a story or something you want to collaborate with me, let me know. Send a link to my email or just leave a comment. Alrighty guys, thanks for listening and I'll see you in the next video. Alrighty guys, bye.